Welcome to part two of vocabulary strategies. Vocabulary rather, in this part we're going to talk about some vocabulary strategies. The first one is become a very common one over the past couple of decades. It's called the Frere model. You have probably talked about this in other classes. You may have seen this in the field. You may have done this yourself as a student. Essentially, this model uses examples and non-examples to teach vocabulary. And using examples and non-examples is actually a really powerful way to teach. It is a good way to teach concepts in general, including vocabulary concepts. So typically, it includes examples and non-examples. It includes a definition in student-friendly language. It may include how it differs from similar words. And in some cases, in some versions of it, rather than these, it might include, instead of one of them, characteristics and non-characteristics. So in other words, if we were doing mammals, examples of mammals would be, a panda, a duck-billed platypus, and non-examples would be a penguin and a crocodile. But then characteristics would be things like, right, it has fur, it gives birth to live young, and non-characteristics would be things that are not true, it's cold-blooded, for example. And then visuals. Visuals are controversial because they aren't part of a quote-unquote true Frere model. I had a language arts teacher friend, a former colleague, who did a Frere model, and she always had her students draw a visual, and the instructional coach got really mad at her, which is ridiculous. Visuals are great to include in Frere models. As I mentioned, research shows that examples and non-examples are one of the most effective ways to teach concepts. A Frere model requires lots of effort. Don't do it for every vocabulary word you introduce. You will burn your students out. Save it for the most important concepts. If you search for Frere model, you will find tons of graphic organizers and tons of examples. So here is one such graphic organizer I found. So the term in the center, the definition, examples, non-examples, and characteristics. Here's another example that includes, again, the word in the middle. This does not include a definition. It includes essential and non-essential characteristics. It includes examples and non-examples, and it includes a symbol or a picture. Here is a student model I found online for an elementary student. This is the word predict, and it includes a visual, a definition, synonyms or examples, antonyms or non-examples, and then its use in a sentence. Another example, here we have rocks, definition in your own words, facts or characteristics, examples, non-examples. Here's an example from social studies, doing sort of a compare and contrast type. So urban and rural, a definition, a picture, characteristics, examples. I would always personally include both examples and non-examples. I think that's a really powerful thing to do. But again, you can make it your own. It's okay. Another strategy that is helpful for some types of vocabulary instruction is using categories and labels. Having students self-categorize words can be helpful in teaching vocabulary. For this approach, you select keywords, put them in a word bank, read them aloud to students. That uses their listening vocabulary, which is usually bigger than other types of vocabulary. Put students in groups, have the groups categorize the words. The groups label their categories and justify the choices that they made. You should do this when you're reading words that easily are categorizable. I'm not sure if that's a word right now. We know that categorizing information, organizing information is positively correlated with student learning. Somewhat related to this is the idea of list, group, label. This is a brainstorming activity before a lesson or a unit. Students brainstorm words and then categorize them. Each student brainstorms words related to the theme of the upcoming lesson, the upcoming reading selection, the upcoming novel, whatever it may be. Groups combine lists and categorize those lists into broader categories of their choice, and groups label their categories. This works as a pre-assessment before a unit or a lesson. It helps students activate their background knowledge, and again, research supports strongly having students categorize. Another type of categorization activity is a word sort. In this approach, students sort words into categories. In a closed word sort, the categories are provided by you, the teacher. In an open word sort, the students choose their own categories. So you as a teacher create the word bank. Students sort the words and justify their decisions. And the teacher may or may not create categories. This is another type of pre-reading activity, and again, we know categorization is good. Another technique that can be used, this is, I know, is a little elementary, but it can be used effectively in high school, are word walls. Word walls, shared collection of words, they support learning. You want to choose high utility or topical words. How it works? Well, if you're using frequently encountered words, high utility words, they're going to be in alphabetical order. Topical words will be by category. And the categories might be the same categories that students created for one of the other activities. Word walls need to not just be up in a classroom, but actually used for instruction to be effective. They should be added to throughout the instructional period. It's helpful if they're individualized to students or groups. Why? Well, for one reason, word walls support academic writing because the words to use in writing are kind of right there. If you're not sure what to write, look at the word wall and you will see. Here are some examples. You see, I know they're a little bit hard to see here. There is one for science. Common words. Again, these are elementary examples because word walls are more common in elementary school. I have seen them used in middle school. They're especially useful if you have lots of students who have learning disabilities or other types of exceptionalities, and they're especially useful if you have students who are learning English. Here's part of an alphabetical one. Here is a word wall of words to use instead of commonly used words, right? What could you say instead of little? What could you write instead of smart? What could you write instead of pretty? And then finally, I kind of like sharing this just because the teacher looks kind of special. It's apparently been a rough. It's been a rough semester for them. But here's another example of a word wall in um, probably an upper elementary classroom would be my guess based on those words. I would guess fifth grade, give or take. Which of course you'll be certified to teach. Some of these are up there because they are commonly used and commonly mistaken. Some of these might be used for other reasons. Um, and some of them are simple, some of them are a little bit harder. So yeah, it might be fourth grade too. Like I'm totally guessing on the grade level here. So again, word walls. I'm not saying like I would not use a word wall like necessarily in a high school English class, um, but I don't know. I think that they might have benefits as well. I will say that this picture is a good picture for you to remember. It is important that your classrooms displays not be overly busy and not be overly cluttered. This one is. There's too much going on those walls. Um, Less is more. You obviously don't want entirely blank walls. You want to display student work. You want to have instructional materials posted, definitely. But you don't need to fill up every square foot of your walls. And in fact, you shouldn't. It is distracting for students. It can be overwhelming for students with some types of disabilities, including ADHD and autism and others as well. So, yes, have wall decorations, have a pleasant room, but also have spaces on those walls where there is nothing, where a student who's getting overwhelmed can just kind of sit and stare at a blank wall for a few minutes. So I hope you found some of these ideas interesting. There are many more out there if you use Google or other sources. There's also lots of great books on vocabulary instruction. The books of Janet Allen, for example, they have been around for a very long time. I was given them as a teacher. They're still very relevant and useful. So those sorts of resources are pretty readily available because they've been out forever. They are very inexpensive to acquire because they are been so through so many printings. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.